My name is Agnes Reed, and I am 88 years old. Most people who see me see only the wrinkles, the slow, careful way I move my hands to pick up a lukewarm cup of tea. They see the beige walls of my room here at the Golden Meadows Retirement Community and assume it's the only world I've ever known. They see a quiet old woman, a relic, someone whose stories are faded photographs of Tupperware parties and 4th of July parades. They are wrong. For 50 years of my life, I was not Agnes Reed. I was Sister Agnes, and I was a keeper of secrets so dark they could curdle the soul. The beige walls around me are not a peaceful final chapter. They are a cage, and the silence in this room is louder than any scream I have ever heard. My grandson, Rhett, and his wife, Brielle, are visiting today. They come once a month, a duty they perform with the strained cheerfulness of people paying a bill they can't afford. Rhett is a good boy at heart, but he's wrapped around Brielle's perfectly manicured finger. She is a woman who sees the world in terms of assets and liabilities. To her, I am a liability, and the small farmhouse I still own on the edge of town is a significant asset. They sit on the edge of my bed, their bodies angled toward the door, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. Brielle holds a glossy brochure. It's for a real estate agency, the kind with sharp-suited men who promise quick sales and maximum profit. She believes I don't notice, that my mind is as faded as my eyesight. Graham. Rhett begins, his voice gentle but firm, the way you speak to a child. We've been talking to a wonderful man, a Mr. Gable. He says the market is incredible right now. Your old place, the land alone is worth a fortune. Think of what you could do with that money. Better care, private nurses, anything you want. He avoids my eyes, looking instead at a water stain on the ceiling. Brielle, however, looks right at me, her gaze like a surveyor's, measuring my worth. It's just sitting there, Agnes, she says, dropping the gram. All that property going to waste. The upkeep is a nightmare, and honestly, it's a burden on Rhett. We have to drive out there every other week just to make sure squatters haven't moved in. It's time to let it go. For your own good. I feel a familiar, cold rage begin to smolder in my chest. My farm. They call it a burden. They have no idea what that land holds, what it represents. They see dirt and a dilapidated house. I see a promise I made to a ghost 50 years ago. I see a sanctuary and a tomb. For decades, I have been silent, bound by vows I left behind but could never truly escape, and by the fear that no one would ever believe me. But looking at their faces, at their casual, dismissive greed, I realize that silence has a price. My silence has allowed evil to grow old and comfortable, just like me. My silence has let them believe I am nothing more than this frail body in a nursing home bed. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warmth does little to thaw the ice in my veins. I set the cup down, and the small click of ceramic on the saucer seems to echo in the room. You cannot sell that farm, I say, my voice raspy but clear, startling them both. Rhett shifts uncomfortably. Brielle's smile tightens. Now, Agnes, let's not be difficult, she coos, her tone laced with condescension. We have your power of attorney. We just want you to be on board, to understand that we are doing what is best for you. They believe they have all the power. They have documents and lawyers. But I have the truth. A truth that has been buried for half a century. You don't understand, I say, looking past them, toward the window that shows a sliver of manicured lawn. There is something on that property. Something you must not disturb. Rhett forces a laugh. Graham, what are you talking about? Hidden treasure? You've been watching too many old movies. But Brielle leans in, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her sharp eyes. What do you mean, Agnes? What's on the property? I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy blanket of unspoken history. I finally turn my gaze to meet hers, and for the first time, she sees something other than a feeble old woman. She sees the shadow of Sister Agnes. You're so worried about what's under the roof, I whisper, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. You should be worried about what's under the ground. Especially near that old, capped well at the edge of the woods. Thank you for watching. The story of what Sister Agnes knows is just beginning. If you want to know what secrets are buried on that farm, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell. My name is Agnes Reed, and I am 88 years old. Most people who see me see only the wrinkles, the slow, careful way I move my hands to pick up a lukewarm cup of tea. They see the beige walls of my room here at the Golden Meadows Retirement Community and assume it's the only world I've ever known. They see a quiet old woman, a relic, someone whose stories are faded photographs of Tupperware parties and 4th of July parades. They are wrong. For 50 years of my life, I was not Agnes Reed. I was Sister Agnes, and I was a keeper of secrets so dark they could curdle the soul. The beige walls around me are not a peaceful final chapter. They are a cage, and the silence in this room is louder than any scream I have ever heard. My grandson, Rhett, and his wife, Brielle, are visiting today. They come once a month, a duty they perform with the strange cheerfulness of people paying a bill they can't afford. Rhett is a good boy at heart, but he's wrapped around Brielle's perfectly manicured finger. She is a woman who sees the world in terms of assets and liabilities. To her, I am a liability, and the small farmhouse I still own on the edge of town is a significant asset. They sit on the edge of my bed, their bodies angled toward the door, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. Brielle holds a glossy brochure. It's for a real estate agency, the kind with sharp-suited men who promise quick sales and maximum profit. She believes I don't notice, that my mind is as faded as my eyesight. Graham. Rhett begins, his voice gentle but firm, the way you speak to a child. We've been talking to a wonderful man, a Mr. Gable. He says the market is incredible right now. Your old place, the land alone is worth a fortune. Think of what you could do with that money. Better care, private nurses, anything you want. He avoids my eyes, looking instead at a water stain on the ceiling. Brielle, however, looks right at me, her gaze like a surveyor's, measuring my worth. It's just sitting there, Agnes, she says, dropping the gram. All that property going to waste. The upkeep is a nightmare, and honestly, it's a burden on Rhett. We have to drive out there every other week just to make sure squatters haven't moved in. It's time to let it go. For your own good. I feel a familiar, cold rage begin to smolder in my chest. My farm. They call it a burden. They have no idea what that land holds, what it represents. They see dirt and a dilapidated house. I see a promise I made to a ghost 50 years ago. I see a sanctuary and a tomb. For decades, I have been silent, bound by vows I left behind but could never truly escape, and by the fear that no one would ever believe me. But looking at their faces, at their casual, dismissive greed, I realize that silence has a price. My silence has allowed evil to grow old and comfortable, just like me. My silence has let them believe I am nothing more than this frail body in a nursing home bed. I take a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. The warmth does little to thaw the ice in my veins. I set the cup down, and the small click of ceramic on the saucer seems to echo in the room. You cannot sell that farm, I say, my voice raspy but clear, startling them both. Rhett shifts uncomfortably. Brielle's smile tightens. Now, Agnes, let's not be difficult, she coos, her tone laced with condescension. We have your power of attorney. We just want you to be on board, to understand that we are doing what is best for you. They believe they have all the power. They have documents and lawyers. But I have the truth. A truth that has been buried for half a century. You don't understand, I say, looking past them, toward the window that shows a sliver of manicured lawn. There is something on that property. Something you must not disturb. Rhett forces a laugh. Graham, what are you talking about? Hidden treasure? You've been watching too many old movies. But Brielle leans in, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her sharp eyes. What do you mean, Agnes? What's on the property? I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy blanket of unspoken history. I finally turn my gaze to meet hers, and for the first time, she sees something other than a feeble old woman. She sees the shadow of Sister Agnes. You're so worried about what's under the roof, I whisper, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. You should be worried about what's under the ground. Especially near that old, capped well at the edge of the woods. Thank you for watching. The story of what Sister Agnes knows is just beginning. If you want to know what secrets are buried on that farm, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell. The days that followed Alara Sinclair's confession were a special kind of hell. The secret sat in my stomach like a shard of glass. Every time I saw Arthur Sinclair at Sunday Mass, standing tall and proud in the front pew, my hands would tremble. He would shake Father Michael's hand after the service, slipping a thick envelope into his palm, and I would feel a wave of nausea. He was buying his salvation, paying for the church to look the other way. I watched Father Michael smile and thank him, and a small crack formed in the foundation of my faith. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand on the altar and expose him for the monster he was. But I was Sister Agnes, a woman of God, sworn to silence. I tried to work within the rules. I went to the Mother Superior, a stern, rigid woman named Sister Mary Catherine. I spoke to her in hypotheticals, carefully omitting names. I asked what a nun should do if she heard of a child in grave danger through the confessional. Her answer was swift and cold. The seal is inviolable, sister. It is a sacred trust between a soul and God Almighty. Our duty is to pray for that soul and trust in God's plan. To do otherwise is to invite scandal upon the church and to commit a grievous sin. She looked at me with suspicion, her eyes like chips of flint. Do not meddle in affairs that are not your concern. Your concern is prayer and obedience. Her words felt like a locked door. I then tried to approach Father Michael. I found him in the rectory garden, tending to his prize-winning roses. He listened patiently, his handsome face a mask of solemn concern as I spoke, again, in vague terms. This is a heavy burden, sister, he said, snipping a dead blossom from a bush. Of course, the welfare of a child is paramount. But we must be careful. Accusations, even whispers of them, can destroy a good man's reputation. Especially a man as important to our community as, he trailed off, but he didn't need to say the name. We both knew who we were talking about. Perhaps the child is prone to fantasy? Children have such active imaginations. He was offering me an escape, a way to dismiss Alara's terror as a childish dream. It was the moment I realized that he was not a shepherd protecting his flock. He was a gatekeeper protecting his most valuable sheep. That night, I couldn't sleep. I knelt on the cold wooden floor of my small room in the convent, praying for guidance, for a sign. But the heavens were silent. All I could hear was Alara's whispered question, "Am I bad?" I realized then that my vow of silence was not protecting God. It was protecting a monster. It was a shield for the wicked, not a comfort for the innocent. And if the institution I served would not protect that child, then I would. I had taken a vow to God, but my first duty as a human being was to another human being in pain. In the quiet darkness of my room, I made a choice. I would break the rules. I wouldn't break the seal. I would not repeat what was said in confession, but I would act on what I now knew. The next day, during catechism, I kept Alara behind after class. I told her we were going to work on a special art project. I gave her paper and crayons, and instead of asking her to draw a picture of Noah's Ark, I asked her to draw her home, to draw her family, to draw her favorite places to hide. Then I asked her to draw the monster. She hesitated, her small hand shaking, then she picked up a black crayon and drew a tall, dark shape with no face. As she drew, I talked to her gently, not about confession, but about being brave. I told her that if she ever felt scared, she should run to a safe place. I told her that she could always come to me, no matter what. I gave her a small, Silver Street Christopher medal. He is the patron saint of travelers, I told her. He will keep you safe on your journey. I was planting a seed, trying to give her the tools to save herself. I was meddling. I had crossed a line, and I knew there would be no going back. Sister Agnes has chosen a dangerous path, defying her superiors to help a child in need. But will her efforts be enough? The consequences of her actions are coming. My small act of defiance felt like shouting into a hurricane. A week after I gave Alara the Street Christopher medal, she didn't show up for catechism class. Then she missed school on Monday. Then Tuesday. A quiet, nervous energy began to ripple through Havenwood. The Sinclairs were private people, but a child's absence is a loud silence. By Wednesday, the story was all over town, delivered in hushed tones over backyard fences and in the aisles of the grocery store. Alara Sinclair had run away from home. Arthur Sinclair himself had gone to the police. He'd put on a masterful performance of a distraught father, his voice thick with sorrow, telling the sheriff that Alara had been a troubled child lately, prone to flights of fancy and melancholic moods. The town bought his story completely. They saw a powerful man brought low by a difficult daughter. They murmured with pity, saying how you can give a child everything. A big house, fancy clothes, all the toys in the world, and it still isn't enough. I saw something else. I saw a predator creating a narrative, expertly painting his victim as the aggressor. My blood ran cold. She didn't run away. I knew it in my bones. The last time I saw her, she was terrified, yes, but she wasn't a runaway. She was a captive looking for an escape. My conversation with her, my gift of the medal, had I somehow triggered this? Had I given her false hope, causing her to act rashly and put herself in even greater danger? The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The police investigation was a joke. The town sheriff, a man who owed his job to the goodwill of men like Arthur Sinclair, conducted a few cursory interviews. He drove up to the Sinclair mansion, accepted a cup of coffee, and came back telling everyone how heartbroken Mr. Sinclair was. They organized a town search, a piece of community theater to make everyone feel like they were doing something. Hundreds of people, including myself and Father Michael, combed the woods surrounding the town. Father Michael led a public prayer for Alara's safe return, his beautiful voice filled with a sorrow that I now knew was completely hollow. As I walked through the dense woods, calling her name until my throat was raw, I felt like a fraud. I couldn't tell the police what I knew. "How do you know she was unhappy, sister?" they would ask. "She told me in confession," I would have to say, and that would be the end of it. My testimony would be thrown out, I would be excommunicated, and Arthur Sinclair would walk away untouched. I was trapped in a prison of my own making. But I remembered something from our last conversation. When I'd asked her to draw her favorite place to hide, she hadn't drawn her closet or a treehouse. She drew a strange, rocky outcrop, with a small cave-like opening. "It's my special place," she had whispered. "Near the noisy place. The quarry." That evening, after the official search had been called off for the day, I went there myself. I left the convent under the pretense of Vesper prayers at a sister parish and drove my old, beat-up parish car to the edge of the Sinclair quarry. The place was closed for the night, an eerie, gaping wound in the earth under the pale moonlight. I climbed the fence, my black habit catching on the chain links, and made my way to the rocky cliffs on the far side. I found it, just as she'd drawn it. A small fissure in the rock, almost completely hidden by overgrown bushes. My heart pounded as I squeezed inside. It was a tiny cave, no bigger than a closet. And it was empty, except for one thing. Lying on the dusty ground was a single small, white ribbon, the kind Alara always wore in her hair. She had been here. My safe place had been her hiding spot. And now she was gone. I knelt in the dirt, clutching the ribbon in my hand, and for the first time since taking my vows, I wept not for God, but for the profound and utter failure of man. The ribbon is a clue, but Alara is gone. Sister Agnes is the only one who suspects foul play, but she's trapped by her vows. Is there any hope for justice? Don't go anywhere. The weeks turned into months, and the months bled into years. Alara Sinclair's face on the missing posters faded under the relentless sun and rain until she was just a ghost on a telephone pole. The town of Havenwood moved on, as towns do. The official story was cemented in local lore, the tragic tale of the rich, troubled girl who ran away and was never seen again. Arthur Sinclair played the part of the grieving father to perfection. His donations to the church became even more generous. He funded a new youth center, and they named it the Alara Sinclair Memorial Hall. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost beautiful in its audacity. Every Sunday, he would sit in the front pew, and Father Michael would offer a prayer for the Sinclairs, asking God to ease their suffering. And I would sit in the back, a silent witness, feeling the scream that had been lodged in my throat for years. I stayed at St. Jude's, but something inside me had broken. I performed my duties, teaching, praying, tending to the poor, but it all felt like a pantomime. My faith in the institution, in the men who ran it, was gone. My faith in God was hanging by a thread. How could a just God allow this to happen? How could he demand my silence in the face of such evil? I started to watch Arthur Sinclair, not as a parishioner, but as a predator. I became a student of his habits. I noticed things no one else did. The way he never spoke Alara's name, not once, after the first few months. The way his wife seemed to shrink, becoming more and more spectral until she eventually succumbed to a long illness a few years later. I began to keep a journal. It was a plain black, leather-bound book that I kept hidden under a loose floorboard in my small room at the convent. It was an act of profound rebellion, a sin of its own. In it, I broke my sacred vow over and over again. I wrote down everything I remembered from Alara's confession, every word, every terrified sob. I documented my conversation with Mother Superior, my plea to Father Michael. I described my discovery of the ribbon in the cave. I became a chronicler of the truth that everyone else had agreed to forget. I detailed every suspicious glance from Arthur Sinclair, every overly pious donation, every late-night trip I saw him take in his expensive car, heading out of town toward the old highway. It was a useless, powerless act, but it was the only thing I could do. That journal was my confession, my penance, and my prayer all in one. One evening, about 5 years after Alara had vanished, I overheard a conversation between two men who worked at the quarry. They were talking about how Mr. Sinclair had suddenly sold off a large and used parcel of land on the far side of the property, near the woods. He sold it for a surprisingly low price to an out-of-state developer who immediately fenced it off. The men thought it was strange, but chalked it up to the eccentricities of a rich man. My blood ran cold. I knew that land. It was near the main road, but it was also close to the cliffs where Alara used to hide. It was a place where something could be buried, hidden, and forgotten forever. The journal became my anchor in a sea of hypocrisy. The pages filled with my spidery script, a testament to a crime no one believed had happened. It was my secret burden, a cross I had chosen to bear. I was no longer just a nun. I was a watchman. I was waiting. I didn't know what for, but I knew that as long as Arthur Sinclair walked the earth as a free and respected man, my duty was not over. The girl with the terrified eyes deserved at least one person to remember the truth. I was that person, and I would wait for as long as it took for God, or the devil, to give me a chance to make it known. For years, Sister Agnes has been a silent keeper of the flame, her journal the only proof of a terrible crime. How long can a secret like that stay buried? 20 years. For 20 years, I lived that dual life. On the surface, I was the dutiful, quiet Sister Agnes. I aged within the convent walls, my hands growing knotted, my face etched with lines that had nothing to do with piety and everything to do with a long-held, silent rage. But beneath the habit, I was a guardian of a secret. My journal grew thick, the pages yellowed and soft with age. It was a heavy, dangerous thing, filled with 2 decades of observations, suspicions, and the raw, unvarnished truth of what I believed happened to Alara Sinclair. Arthur Sinclair also aged. His hair turned to silver, and he leaned on a cane, but his eyes remained as hard and cold as quarry stone. He was a town elder now, a beloved philanthropist. The ghost of his daughter was just a sad, forgotten footnote in his triumphant life story. The breaking point came on a cold autumn day. I was in town buying supplies for the convent kitchen when I saw him. Arthur Sinclair was at the dedication of a new town park, standing on a gazebo beside the mayor. He was donating a large sum for a new children's playground. As the crowd applauded, he smiled, a benevolent, grandfatherly expression on his face. He leaned into the microphone and said, "Nothing is more important than the safety and happiness of our children. They are our most precious resource." The hypocrisy was so profound, so utterly blasphemous, that the world around me went silent. I felt the scream that had been trapped in my throat for 20 years clawing its way up. I had to grip the side of a building to keep from fainting. In that moment, I knew I could not do it anymore. I could not wear the holy cloth of an institution that had, through its silence and its greed, enabled this monster to flourish. My vows had become a cage, not a comfort. The silence they demanded was not holy. It was complicit. I had tried to serve God, but in doing so, I had failed one of his children in the most fundamental way. I walked back to the convent in a daze, the sound of the town's applause for their great benefactor echoing in my ears. That night, I did not pray. I packed. I placed my journal at the bottom of a small suitcase, wrapped in my spare wimple. It was the only thing of value I truly owned. The process of leaving the order was a quiet, bureaucratic kind of scandal. It required letters, meetings, and psychiatric evaluations designed to determine if I was of sound mind. Mother Superior, a new one now, but with the same rigid spine as the last, looked at me with pity and disdain. To leave after so many years, sister, it is a great tragedy, a failure of your faith. I did not argue with her. How could I explain that I was leaving not because my faith had failed, but because it had been honed to a single, sharp point? My new faith was in justice. My new God was the truth. My request was eventually granted. I was to be released from my vows, a process that felt less like a spiritual unburdening and more like being dishonorably discharged. On my last day, I walked out of the convent doors dressed in simple, gray layperson's clothes that felt strange and foreign against my skin. I was no longer Sister Agnes. I was just Agnes Reed, a woman of 45 with no family, no money, and a past that no one could ever know. I used the small pittance the church provided to former nuns to put a down payment on a small, run-down farmhouse on the outskirts of Havenwood. It was all I could afford. But it wasn't just any farmhouse. It was on an old country road, and from my back porch, through a line of thinning trees, I could see the overgrown, fenced-off land that Arthur Sinclair had sold off so many years ago. I was still watching. My vigil had not ended. It had simply changed its form. I was no longer a nun in a convent. I was a hermit on a hill, a silent sentinel standing guard over a forgotten grave. Agnes has sacrificed everything, her calling, her community, her identity, for a truth only she knows. But her new life is about to collide with the past she can't escape. The next 40 years of my life were quiet, but they were not peaceful. I was Agnes Reed now, the eccentric old woman who lived alone in the farmhouse at the end of Cherry Tree Lane. I tended a large garden, kept a few chickens, and sold eggs and vegetables at a small stand by the road. The people of Havenwood mostly left me alone. They remembered I had once been a nun, and they treated me with a mixture of respect and suspicion. I never married. I never had children of my own. My heart had a piece missing, a space that was forever occupied by the ghost of a little girl with terrified eyes. The journal remained my only confidant, its pages now brittle with age. My only real family was Rhett. He was the grandson of a distant cousin of mine from another state. When his parents died in a car crash when he was just a teenager, I was his only living relative. I took him in. He was a sullen, angry boy, grieving and lost. My small, quiet farmhouse became his home. I raised him as best I could, teaching him to garden, to be kind, to look a person in the eye when he spoke. For a few years, the house was filled with the noise of a growing boy, and it almost felt normal. But he grew up as boys do. He went to college, met Brielle, and moved to the city to make his fortune. His visits became less frequent, his phone calls shorter. He loved me, I think, in his own way, but he was embarrassed by my simple life, by the old woman who still smelled faintly of potting soil and mothballs. Now, I am back in the present day in this sterile room at Golden Meadows. My revelation about the old well has changed the atmosphere. Rhett looks confused, worried that I'm finally losing my mind. But Brielle looks intrigued. Greed is a powerful motivator, and the idea of something on the property has her hooked. She sees a potential complication to the sale, a problem that needs to be solved. They leave soon after, promising to look into it, a phrase that sounds more like a threat than a comfort. I am alone again with the echoes and the ghosts. My mind drifts back to the farm, to the land itself. I had spent 40 years walking that property. I knew every tree, every dip in the terrain, and I knew the old well. It was a stone-lined dry well, capped with a heavy concrete slab that had been there long before I bought the house. It was located at the far edge of my property, right up against the fence line of the land Arthur Sinclair had sold off decades ago. I had always felt a strange coldness around that spot, a feeling of profound sorrow that made the hairs on my arms stand up. In my more fanciful moments, I imagined it was Alara's spirit, tethered to the place where her secret was buried. I never went near it if I could help it. But now, my grandson and his wife, in their blind rush to liquidate my life, were threatening to disturb the one place on earth I felt needed to be left in peace. A week later, they are back. Brielle is holding a sheaf of papers, her face alight with triumphant purpose. "We had a surveyor go out to the property, Agnes," she announces, her voice sharp and businesslike, "just to get the official boundaries marked for the sale. And he found something interesting." She spreads a large map across my lap. It's a survey of my farm. "His ground-penetrating radar picked up an anomaly," she continues, tapping a spot on the map with a long, red fingernail. "Right here. By the old well. He says it's likely a void, maybe a sinkhole starting to form, or just buried debris. Either way, for a clean sale, it needs to be investigated and filled. It's a liability." Rhett looks apologetic. "Graham, it's just a precaution. We have to do it for insurance purposes. We've hired a small crew to come out with a backhoe next week. It won't take more than a day." I stare at the map, at the red circle she has drawn. It sits directly over the place I have avoided for 40 years. They weren't looking for a secret. They were just following procedure. But sometimes, the most terrible truths are unearthed by accident. The past and present are about to collide in the most dramatic way possible. A backhoe is on its way to the one spot Agnes has feared for decades. What will they find? You absolutely must be here for the next chapter. Hit subscribe, because Chapter 8 is when everything changes. The week leading up to the excavation was the longest of my life. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alara's face, her eyes wide with fear. I was trapped in this nursing home, miles away from my farm, a powerless old woman waiting for a phone call that could shatter the world. I tried to call Rhett, to plead with him one more time to stop it. "Graham, it's already scheduled," he'd said, his voice weary. "The crew is booked. It's just digging up some old dirt. Please don't worry about it." He didn't understand. He thought I was being sentimental, a foolish old woman clinging to a patch of land. He had no idea I was a guardian standing vigil over a tomb, and that he had just handed the shovel to the grave robbers. The day of the dig, I just sat in my chair, staring at the phone, my hands clenched in my lap. My mind became a kaleidoscope of fractured memories. I saw myself as a young nun, listening to Alara's whispered confession in the dark. I saw the flash of headlights from Arthur Sinclair's car on the old highway, late at night, heading in the direction of the farm. I remembered a night, not long after I'd bought the house, when a storm had knocked out the power. I'd been looking out the back window and saw a flicker of light, like a single lantern, moving near the old well at the edge of the property line. At the time, I dismissed it as a trick of the moonlight or a hunter. Now, the memory returned with chilling clarity. He had come back. He had been checking on his secret. The hours ticked by. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. At 3:30, the phone finally rang. It was Rhett. I fumbled for the receiver, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Graham," he said. His voice was different. The condescending patience was gone. In its place was a tone of awe and confusion. "You need to come out here. Brielle is already on her way to pick you up." You were right, Graham. There was something in the ground." He paused, and I could hear the sound of the wind and the beeping of the backhoe in the background. "It's not a sinkhole." The backhoe hit something. Something metal. A chest. A locked, metal chest. The ride to the farm with Brielle was silent. For once, she had nothing to say. Her face was pale, her usual composure completely gone. When we pulled up the long gravel driveway, I saw it. The scene was surreal. A yellow backhoe sat idle next to a gaping hole in the earth, a pile of dark, rich soil beside it. Rhett was standing there with 2 dirt-streaked workmen, all of them staring at a rusted metal footlocker that sat on the grass. It looked like an old military trunk. It was caked in mud and rust, but it was intact. It had a large, heavy padlock on it. "We stopped as soon as we hit it," Rhett said, rushing over to help me out of the car. "We didn't want to open it without you here." I walked slowly toward the chest, my cane sinking into the soft grass. The cold spot. I could feel it even now, a palpable aura of sorrow and long-kept silence radiating from the hole in the ground. For 50 years, this secret had been buried just a few feet beneath the earth. I had walked over it, tended the garden near it, lived my life beside it, and never known. The workmen had a pair of bolt cutters. One of them looked at Rhett, who then looked at me. I was the one they were waiting for. The crazy old woman who talked about things buried in the ground. I nodded. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The workman placed the jaws of the cutters around the shackle of the old padlock. He squeezed. There was a loud, sharp snap that echoed across the quiet fields. The lock fell away. The past was about to be opened. The chest is open. The secret that Sister Agnes has carried for more than 50 years is about to be revealed. This is the moment everything has been leading to. You cannot miss this. One of the workmen lifted the heavy, groaning lid of the metal chest. Rhett and Brielle leaned in, their faces filled with a treasure hunter's anticipation. I held my breath, praying. What I expected to see, I don't know. Bones, perhaps. The final, grisly proof of the murder I had always suspected. But the contents were far more complex, and in their own way, far more horrifying. The inside of the chest was lined with oilcloth, and the items within were remarkably preserved. There was no body. Instead, laid out carefully, was a collection of a little girl's treasures. There was a worn teddy bear with one button eye, a small collection of colorful stones, a child's drawing of a family where one figure was scribbled out in black, and the small, Silver Street Christopher medal I had given her all those years ago. It was a time capsule of a stolen childhood. My knees felt weak, and Rhett had to steady me. This wasn't a grave. This was a memorial. This was Alara's own doing. She had buried her life before she disappeared. But there was more. Beneath the toys was a small, leather-bound diary and a thick manila envelope. Rhett gently lifted them out. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and forgotten time. He opened the diary. The handwriting was a child's scrawl, filled with misspelled words and heartbreakingly simple sentences. It detailed the games her father played, the secrets she was forced to keep. It was a complete and total validation of everything she had confessed to me. But the last entry was the most chilling. It was dated the day before she vanished. "He knows I told," she wrote. "He says I am a bad, lying girl and that he is sending me away to a special school to be fixed. A school for bad girls. He says my name isn't Alara anymore. He says Alara is gone. She hadn't been murdered. She had been erased. Her father, to protect himself, had shipped her off to some cruel, hidden institution under a false identity, effectively killing the person she was and burying any connection to him. Then Brielle, her hands trembling, opened the manila envelope. It wasn't from Alara. The documents inside were financial records, ledgers, and deeds. It was proof of something else entirely. For years, Arthur Sinclair had been systematically embezzling money from his own company, the Quarry, hiding it in offshore accounts. The documents in this envelope, which Alara must have stolen from his office, were the key to it all. It finally made sense. Her disappearance wasn't just about covering up his monstrous abuse. It was about protecting his financial empire. A full-blown investigation into his daughter's disappearance might have unearthed his other crimes. By creating the runaway narrative, he controlled everything. He had silenced the one person who could bring his entire world crashing down. "My God," Brielle whispered, staring at the papers. For the first time, she wasn't seeing a real estate deal. She was seeing the shape of a true, calculated evil that had persisted for decades. Rhett looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding of who I was and what I had been carrying all these years. He saw not a confused, elderly woman, but a warrior who had stood a silent 50-year watch. In the distance, across the fields, the lights of a large mansion on a hill began to twinkle against the twilight sky. The old Sinclair estate. Arthur Sinclair, now in his 90s and reportedly in failing health, still lived there. The monster was still alive, and we were standing on the proof that could finally destroy him. "The truth is out," and it's worse than anyone imagined. Agnes now holds the power to expose a lifetime of lies. The final confrontation is coming. This is the finale you've been waiting for. The discovery of the chest sent a shockwave through our lives. Brielle, the sharp-suited businesswoman, was the one who made the call. Not to the police, not yet, but to the best investigative journalist she knew from her corporate life. She understood that a story this old, this explosive, needed to be handled with surgical precision. A small-town police force might bury it again. The media would not. Within 48 hours, my quiet beige room at Golden Meadows became the nerve center of a story that would captivate the nation. A respected journalist named Sarah Jennings sat across from me, her recorder on, her eyes filled with a compassionate intensity. And for the first time, I told my story. All of it. From the confessional to the convent, from the journal to the chest. Rhett sat beside me the whole time, holding my hand. The way he looked at me had changed completely. The patronizing grandson was gone, replaced by a man looking at his grandmother with a profound, humbling respect. He saw the strength I had hidden for a lifetime, the burden I had carried for him and for a little girl he'd never known. He and Brielle had gone through my old journal, the one I had kept hidden for so long. They read the pages, filled with my younger self's anguish and determination, and they finally understood. The sale of the farm was forgotten. Their world of assets and liabilities had been shattered by a story of pure good and absolute evil. The story broke a week later. It was a firestorm. The Nun's Vigil, a 50-year secret unearthed. The headlines were explosive. The combination of a respected nun, a beloved town philanthropist who was actually a monster, a missing child, and a hidden treasure chest of secrets was irresistible. The financial documents were handed over to the FBI, and the story of Arthur Sinclair's abuse, corroborated by Alara's diary, was laid bare for the world to see. His carefully constructed legacy crumbled to dust in a matter of hours. The town of Havenwood was thrown into a state of collective shock and shame. They had praised a devil for half a century. A task force was able to trace the school for bad girls. It was a cruel, unregulated institution in another state that had been shut down by authorities in the 1980s for abuse and neglect. They found a record of a girl admitted under a false name on the exact date Alara disappeared, but the trail went cold after that. We may never know if Alara survived, if she made a new life for herself, or if she perished in that awful place. But we had her story. We had her truth. And we had given it back to the world. Arthur Sinclair, ancient and bedridden in his mansion, was charged. He never stood trial. His heart gave out a week after the story broke, a coward's escape from a reckoning he had avoided his entire life. In the end, I did not return to Golden Meadows. Rhett and Brielle insisted I come live with them, but I refused. I wanted to go home. To my farmhouse. They moved me back, not as a burden, but as the matriarch of their family. They hired a nurse to help me, and they visited every day, not out of duty, but out of love. They helped me tend my garden, and we sat on the back porch, looking out over the land that had kept its secret for so long. The hole by the old well was filled in, but the land no longer felt cold or sad. It felt peaceful. My vigil was over. I had kept my promise to the ghost of a little girl. My name is Agnes Reed. I am 88 years old, and for the first time in a very, very long time, my soul is at peace. Agnes's story is a powerful reminder that truth never truly dies, and that courage can be found in the quietest hearts. If her journey moved you, please share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Subscribe for more powerful stories that deserve to be told.